All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Savvy Sages. I'm Dr. Joseph from Toronto, and I've got my great co host, Dr. Anila from Chicago. We hope your new year is off to a flying start. And if not, that's perfectly fine. That's what we're going to discuss today. The new year is an opportunity for new beginnings and change in some ways, and maybe not in other ways, whatever is healthiest for you. And that's the topic we'll be talking about today. So, welcome to episode 3, Honoring Yourself Through Transformation. All right. And without further ado, we have Dr. Anila to get started on talking about things that worked for you last year and how to hold on to them as we go through this year as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So Joe and I are talking today. We want to kind of explore and invite you to explore what was it that you feel really proud of for yourself last year? What are things that when you look back, you say, maybe these are changes that you had wanted to make from years prior, and you actually have been able to make those changes. I think one of the most important things when we're going through transformation and honoring yourself is first identifying the things that you already have made progress on and you have achieved or that you like about yourself. There's sort of a core of who each and every one of us is that we want to try to hang on to. And I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk a lot about what we want to get to, but we don't always honor where we've already come. Do you feel like that's true, Joe? Have you found that to be true for you too?
Absolutely, Ani. I do believe it's very important to hold on to things that worked well for us and allow that to be a foundation for change, right? As we move into the new year, as we explore new aspects of ourselves that we want to evolve and grow in, I think it's important to look at the things that are already working well for us and appreciate how we got to that point. Because we can often learn from those lessons, from those journeys in terms of those particular changes, apply those lessons to our new journeys when we embrace the other changes that we want in our life as well. So yes, absolutely. I think it's great to look back at that and allow that as a foundation to stimulate further change.
And I think that one thing I've learned for myself too is that there's this foundation of who we are since we were young. There's just a little part of a core part of who we are that I think it's important to learn and acknowledge. My best friend that I had when I was in second grade, we reconnected during the pandemic. We had reconnected just briefly, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And then during the pandemic, we, did some video chats and stuff like that. And I was like, she's awesome. Like, she's super cool. We still get along really, really well. And we still have so much in common, even though our lives have been so divergent for, so many years. And it really got me thinking that the person I chose to be my best friend when I was in second grade would still be my best friend today in some ways if we had more, like if our locations were more similar and if we had more, if our paths had been in a place where we can talk more. And I think that recognizing that makes me feel like the first thing we need to do is acknowledge who that core part of us is and hang on to that so that no matter how good or bad we feel like we are in other parts of life, we have something to fall back on that we know is like ours. It really is like your own thing. I think with that, once we've been able to kind of acknowledge that then and look at that and figure out what is it that I like about myself? What is it that I really cherish about myself? What are things that you're really happy about with yourself? Those things I think need to be acknowledged first so that then when we think about the things that we feel like we want to potentially make adjustments to, or I know you're going to talk a little bit, Joe, about goals in a second. Once we start looking at that, I think first coming from a place of feeling already full and stable, I think that's going to help a little bit more with being able to head on look at the things that we actually do want to adjust about ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it is an important balance, looking at areas that we want to change and holding on to things that are already working for us, right? So absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize the pressure to change whenever we come to things like the new year, and it can often be intimidating. And I think it's important to recognize that change needs to come about where we're ready for it, mentally ready to make those changes. It won't necessarily be comfortable. Change is often uncomfortable, but it is often necessary in certain areas of your life. So as long as you feel ready and prepared for it mentally, oftentimes that will yield the best results. So absolutely, Ani. And I want to talk a little bit more in terms of focusing on goals as opposed to resolutions. When we often think of resolutions, we often think more so in the moment. And I think that's one area where we need to change our thinking a little bit and focus more on goals for the year. Because oftentimes when it comes to goals, we accept and understand that it is going to take time. Goals are more endpoints that we can continually work towards. So naturally, when we get started with change, there's a pressure, I guess, an internal drive to make quick changes. And I think that often leads to not necessarily failure, but possibly disappointment, right? So I wanted to talk about goals and focus on two different types of goals that I came across during my research and reading for this topic. The first would be something we call superordinate goals. So superordinate goals are more broad-based. They're more long-term. They're more vague in terms of what you want to achieve. So an example I would like to give for a superordinate goal would be I want to run a 10K or I want to run a marathon. So you have a goal, but you don't necessarily have an idea or an action plan. This is where what we call subordinate goals come into play. So subordinate goals are what we want to focus on in our daily lives. So they're more smaller changes. They're more day-to-day things that help produce more consistent habits. So going back to our previous example of, wanting to run a 10K, a subordinate goal in order to help achieve that would be something like making the effort to run for 5 minutes every day outside. Okay, or running on the treadmill, for 10 minutes every single day. So subordinate goals are smaller goals that allow us to reach our superordinate goals more effectively, but at the same time build healthier habits. And I think that's something that we want to embrace as well. So not just change, but building healthy habits. And you mentioned earlier, sticking to your core, sticking to characteristics of yourself that have worked for you. When you do something over and over again, it becomes a habit, it becomes a part of your character, and that often results in more sustained long-term improvement. What do you think, Ani?
Yeah, I feel like I think that's the biggest thing is a lot of times we kind of live in this world right now where we sort of want results, we want them fast, and we want them yesterday. And I think recognizing that every little bit can end up counting and every little bit can help. It's only when we do little bits at a time. Also, I think as physicians and healthcare workers, we often are addicted to sort of this perfectionism where we feel like we want to, it's all or nothing. If I want to be on a fitness routine, if I don't do this workout that I said I would do 5 days a week, then I didn't achieve my goal. So therefore, I might as well just quit. And I think that there's a lot of room for gray in there where potentially we can say, well, maybe if I at least just put in 5 minutes today and I don't do my full hour workout, that's still okay. That's still 5 more minutes than I would have gotten otherwise. The other thing that we do a fair amount of is we want our goals to be achieved in a linear manner. And we often think, well, as long as I do, if you want a job, if you want to switch careers or jobs or whatever it is, we think, well, I should be able to apply to this job. And then that's what is going to happen is that I'm going to be able to get this job. And it's just this very linear manner. And I think also in the way that our training has set up has always been that way, college, med school, residency, fellowship, whatever it is, and you get a job. I think recognizing that even a lot of the failures and disappointments, even there's a TED Talk I was listening to recently by Robert Greene, and he's an author, and he talks about how he really struggled for a long time. He wanted to be a writer, or he was a writer, but he was flopping constantly, and his work was not getting published. And so he was doing all these odd end jobs where he would work for construction in Italy, he worked for Hollywood for a while, and he just did a lot of random jobs for 10 to 15 years, but he was interested in just studying people and thinking about stuff and just talking to people. And through that, many, many years later, he eventually did write a book that was a bestseller. And he's actually written several books since then. And he says that it was only from all those pointless things that he felt like he had no direction that it was able to eventually lead him to this bigger goal. And I know Steve Jobs talks about this as well. If anyone's ever listened to his Stanford commencement, which is an excellent speech, he says that he dropped in on a calligraphy class just like randomly, but he didn't think it would ever show up in his future somehow. And then eventually when he designed Apple, it became, that was the source of where fonts came in. So we never know where aimless direction or what we think we're just doing in the interim might actually lead to something bigger that we can't necessarily see right now. But most likely the stuff that's the most meant for us and that we really want to ultimately achieve probably won't happen in a linear fashion. There probably will be a lot of ups and downs and ins and outs and 2 steps forward and 1 step back and things of that sort.
Absolutely, honey. I agree. When it comes to change, I think it's incredibly important to appreciate and reflect during the valley. So when you are making change, you're going to have peaks and valleys, as you mentioned, right? And sometimes we often focus so much on our peaks and we use that for motivation that when we do encounter those valleys, those areas where we may not have necessarily achieved our goals for that particular day or for that particular month, it's easy to get discouraged, right? Whereas if we embrace those valleys, if we embrace those moments where things didn't necessarily go the way we wanted to, it allows for a lot of self-reflection. It allows for a lot of improvement in ways that we don't appreciate, right? And it allows us to learn and allow us to ask ourselves, where did I not necessarily go wrong, but where can I improve on this for the next day, right? And I think it's important to reflect on those moments and allow it to motivate us for further change. You mentioned earlier perfectionism, and I just want to quickly, turn back on that because I think that is something that many of us do struggle with, and I think that is definitely an area where we easily get discouraged, right? So a lot of us are perfectionists, a lot of us are type A personalities, and we think that we always have to succeed, especially when it comes to change. Like, oh, maybe I didn't lose a particular amount of weight in a particular time, or perhaps I didn't necessarily achieve a particular financial goal that I wanted in a particular time, and we can get discouraged easily. And I think one thing that I had to learn as I've gone through my journey of change is striving for excellence as opposed to perfection, right? So this is something that I learned during residency, where you're striving to ultimately do your best and accepting that perhaps you'll get 95% of the change you want in a particular day or meet 95% of your goals, not allowing yourself to be discouraged for the other 5% that you necessarily didn't achieve in that day or in that time period. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're never going to achieve that additional 5%. You just didn't necessarily achieve it at this point because we can't be perfect ultimately, right? So that's something that's helped me in terms of sticking to change, and helping facilitate growth and achieve a lot of my goals for the year, was striving for excellence, right? And accepting that it won't necessarily be perfect. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an important part of actually achieving anything, is if we're always aimed at perfectionism. And Joel, you and I were talking a few minutes ago too about how perfectionism is it can be a defense mechanism in some ways. The only way, or one of the big ways that a lot of us have been able to get to where we're at, is that we did have to have a level of perfectionism in order to go through med school, residency, fellowship, being attending all this stuff. And so in some ways it was a defense mechanism that allowed us to get to where we are, but like all defense mechanisms, they might serve a purpose when we're going through something, but then we have to eventually recognize when they're hindering us from something as well. And I think recognizing that at this point, for many of us, we might be able to still have some level of perfectionism in one aspect of our life that's allowing us to grow. But when it's starting to hinder us from being able to, have self-compassion, have self-confidence, be able to strive for something bigger and newer and figure out how to transform your life into the way that you want it to look, that's when I think we have to reassess and say, okay, maybe this is something that's not serving me anymore, and I need to reconsider where I'm doing that in my life as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you brought up you brought up the word confidence, right? Which is something that we really, we should make sure that we emphasize as well, right? So you're absolutely right. It's easy to lose confidence on your journey. And I think it's important to hold on to that confidence. And even just circling it back to the beginning, focusing on what worked for you in the past, right? And holding on to that, embracing the confidence that comes from achieving that change in your life and using it to continue to motivate you is so important, right? Self-confidence will stimulate a lot of change. And I think, absolutely, Ani, we need to make sure that that's protected as we go through our journey, for sure.
I also think, I'm just going to add in there also, I think it's only when we can look at the negative stuff and face it full on and be able to accept it, and rather than pushing it away, or rather than becoming defensive about it or blaming something else or someone else or whatever it is, I think it's only when we can say, this is a part of me too, because negative stuff is part of 100% of us. None of us are ever going to be free of that. But I think if we keep pushing it away, it's going to keep showing up in different ways, right? Resistance typically leads to persistence, as some people say. But I think when we have that core of us where we do value ourselves and we can say, I know I do this well and I know I do this, then we can actually, it creates space for us to be able to look at the stuff we want to get rid of, that we want to change, that we want to do differently or show up differently. And then we can actually look at that, feel the feelings, or, you know, look at it head on, and then eventually be able to say, now I'm ready for some kind of change, because I'm not avoiding it, but I'm looking at it directly and figuring out how to actually get to where what seems more consistent with who you want to be and where you want to be and the goals, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. And sticking on the point of valuing yourself, I think it's also important to be patient with ourselves too. And I want to get your thoughts in terms of accepting that things will take time, right? Naturally, we touched about this a little bit earlier, but talking about wanting change to come fast. I want to get your thoughts in terms of allowing time for yourself, allowing time for growth, and understanding that oftentimes the most meaningful change is the one that takes the longest time, right? And being patient with ourselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think sometimes it's really great to write stuff down and then look back on it several years later. And I think that is where a lot of times it helps to be able to say, even 1% change, if you do it over 20 years, if you want to change 20% and you only can do 1% change every year, over 20 years, you've accomplished your goal. It just didn't come as quickly as you might have wanted. And I think, again, a lot of us want things to happen like tomorrow. And I get that. I mean, we all want this. This is normal human behavior. But I think recognizing that small changes can be what lead to growth. When I was in 6th grade, we had like the presidential like gym class, sort of thing where you had to be able to do certain fitness goals that they wanted everybody to achieve. And I could only do 16 sit-ups in a minute. And I was so embarrassed by it. And I was like, I'm never going to just do 16 sit-ups in a minute ever again. And so I actually started doing a minute of sit-ups every single night. And eventually by the end of that year, I was able to do 66. And so, and then I actually just kept doing the sit-ups for the next, 15 plus years of my life. And it was something that I just determined, I'm just going to do it. Sometimes I think we have to be focused on just the process and not the results. And I think sometimes when we're so focused on the goal and the results, it actually can be a hindrance for us. But if we can focus on just the process of it and just what you need to do or want to do in that moment, or what you've told yourself you're going to do, that's one of the biggest ways I think we can focus on ultimately getting to a grander goal. Otherwise, that goal feels so far. It's like the destination is not the point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Embracing the journey as opposed to being focused on the end goal is often one great way of allowing yourself to be comfortable and provide a sense of wellness as you go on your journey. Absolutely. Because even if you think about our journeys through to medicine, how many years it was, right? If you look back on it, it was quite a long period. But when you break it down to different parts of your life, taking it day by day, eventually you do get there. And I think you mentioned, keeping a journal, keeping a log. That highlights the importance of recognizing and reflecting on just how far you've come, right? So when you do get to those, when you do hit a wall, when you do reach those valleys in terms of your journey towards change, those are the times you really want to reflect on that, right? And tell yourself, hey, you know what? That's okay. I have to be persistent. I've come this far. I've made these changes. And oftentimes, allowing yourself to give credit for the change you've made so far, right? Yeah, absolutely. Like anything in life, change is absolutely a journey, and it is important to be patient and persistent. The two P's. We love our little alliteration on savvy sages, right? So, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I guess that was a quick primer in terms of helping facilitate change in the new year, but also honoring yourself as you go through your transformations, right? Any final thoughts, Ani, or any additional comments you want to make on this topic?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add is I think one of the other things with transformation is sometimes it feels very serious. Like this is something that we have to do consistently in order to achieve results and these goals. And I think one of the biggest things that can sometimes make that exhausting to deal with is if we're not introducing play. And I think play is one of the places in life where you get to really get in touch with that true core self of yours again, where you're not putting on pretenses, you're not doing something for other people or to achieve necessarily a goal, you're really just in the moment. And so we're going to actually invite all of you guys to have play with us for just a minute. If you have it available to you, we're going to ask you, check in with your core, see kind of how you feel. So ground yourself for a moment, if you can, wherever you are. And then we're just going to ask you to make funny faces for like 15 seconds. So Joe and I are going to do this with you. So just see how that feels sometimes. You know, I think we're always talking about stuff that's so serious, but I think adding in a little bit of play during a day reminds us that we're okay where we're at right now sometimes too. We have goals, we want to achieve them, but it's a balance. Be where you are, and then also 50% of you should be where you are, and then 50%, not should, but could be where you are, and then 50% is striving for stuff for the future. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Joe, that you wanted to add?
No, I'm glad we did that, because you're absolutely right. All of this, life is meant to be enjoyed, right? A quality of life is something that we emphasize for ourselves, for our listeners, and for our patients, right? And so, yeah, during the process, the process of change, the process of transformation, it can be serious, but it is important to also enjoy it and give time to yourself to be silly and relax a bit, because these are difficult times. We live in very to be honest with you, unprecedented times. And giving yourself the space to just be yourself, let the guard down just a little bit, and be relaxed is very important. Giving your time to rest out of your process of change is actually very important. I'm so glad you brought that up, Ani, because it is essential, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. We look forward to our next episode. Before that, we'll have a Zoom to discuss this, and we'd really love to hear your thoughts. Also, any recommendations or suggestions you have or things that you'd like to see done differently, please share with us as well. And Happy New Year.
All right, everyone, stay safe. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.